confidant, my sweet, beautiful, not so nice girl confidant. Welcome to Confidently Insecure, the podcast. We are absolutely sure we don't know everything. I'm your host, Kelsey Darragh. And first, got to address the elephant in the room. Baby, if you're watching this on youtube.com/Kelsey Darragh, you're like, what the fuck is this background? I am in my new office. You guys, we moved. It happened. It's a whole thing. I'm sure I'll do a whole episode all about it, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk to this amazing guest who I am so excited to dive into. You guys, she's really fucking smart. She's really cool. I'm excited for you guys to hear more about her. Her name is Majo Molfino. She's the author of Break the Good Girl Myth. She's the host of the Heroine Podcast and women's leadership expert. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kelsey. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. So I've listened to a bunch of episodes of podcasts that you've been on, and I'm just like, you do so many fucking things. Like, how do you hone in on what exactly like your destiny point is in this life, what you do? I know that's a very loaded question for up top.
I love it. I love this question. I love how you're just going deep right away. Okay, so I like to say that all of us have a why, but we have many different hows.
Ooh, go on.
Yes. So my why is to empower and support women. My how is multiple. So I do it through a podcast. I do it through a book. I do it through a program. And I think that's important to have that like multiplicity.
Yeah.
And not to feel so constrained because we're so creative. Like you're obviously an extremely creative human.
I was saying, it sounds like you would describe me when you were describing yourself. I was like, yeah, you do 800 jobs. We wear 100 hats.
We wear 100 hats. We want to express it in different angles, you know? Podcast is voice, storytelling. Book is like a private experience. Someone's cozying up and getting the message in a different way.
Yes.
Program is like we're going through it together. We're going from good girl to badass together.
Yes. You know? I love that mentality too of like, I don't know why, but I've always felt so like embarrassed or meek about saying I'm a multi-hyphenate. Like it usually is dependent on who I'm talking to that I'll like lead with, oh, I'm a producer first, or, oh, I'm a writer or like content creator. But why is it? I'm sure you have like a very full answer for something like this, but why do we feel like embarrassed, or why do I feel that way to own my own power in what I do?
This is huge. You know, I had a teacher who once said, by the time you're 30, you have 30 little selves inside of you. You know,
I like that.
And the older you get, you have more selves. So you're not one person.
Right.
And I think society likes to put us in boxes and likes to know and define us. And other people want to define us. Like, no, what are you? I want to put you in a box and put a label on you. Yeah. But we're so multidimensional. We have multitudes inside of us. And, you know, one of the big things that I think manifests for us is the myth of rules, which I talk about in the book.
Yes.
You know those rules.
Oh God, we're going to dive into it. Let's do it.
And so one rule is like you have a straight path in your career and you have this conventional career. Are you a doctor? Are you a lawyer? Like let's make it clean. Now we have a whole generation of creative, badass women who are defying those rules and saying, I'm not going to be just one thing.
Right.
In fact, you might have multiple careers in your lifetime.
Yeah, I should. I want to spread this love. Same with my relationship. I mean, that was a side piece of it, but I'm in an open relationship. And like,
there
people
you go.
always talk about like, oh my God, that must be so hard. I'm like, not really. There's so much love and there's so much like happiness. Why wouldn't I want that to be brought out in many ways in different forms? And so that just kind of like tipped its hat towards it when you said that. But I mean,
you were breaking the good girl myth of rules in relationships because there's a rule, which is we all should be monogamous. That's the big rule that has been reinforced in movies, in books,
white picket fence,
in families, religions.
Ooh, girl, you're talking to the right one. It is not for me, sis.
You know,
not for us. So you brought it up a little bit, your book, Break the Good Girl Myth, right? Like there are these myths that we have. I think there's 5, right? And how the patriarchy has manifested inside all of us women and how to break those things. So could you tell me a little bit more about what the 5 myths are, which is a hard word for me to say. Myths.
You're doing great. Myths. Yeah. So there are 5 good girl myths, and I'll just say them real quick and then we'll define them. So the myth of rules, perfection, logic, harmony, and sacrifice. So those are the 5 good girl myths. A good girl myth is a sneaky subconscious tendency that we pick up as little girls. And then they yeah. So it's like a software program that's been downloaded and we're running on it. And then we're still running on it in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, but we don't realize that's the program we're running on. And so part of the work with the book and the work that I do with women, it's like, let's wake up. Let's wake up from that. Let's snap out of it and realize this is default programming and choose something else.
Right.
And so I'm happy to go through each one.
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Okay.
Hell yeah.
All right. So myth of rules, which we touched on a little bit, is following external rules and authority instead of trusting your own needs, desires, and opinions.
You're going to hear a lot of noises from me this episode. I have a feeling.
You're like, amen.
It's just coming out of me. I'm like, sis, say it in the back. Yeah.
But of course we would have this, right? Like since we're young, it's like, listen to your teacher, listen to your parent, listen to your preacher, your priest, your rabbi. Like it's all about, your celebrity. It's like looking outward for answers instead of inward. So that's, very common. The myth of perfection is my primary good girl myth. So this is when we demand perfection in ourselves and other people, like having impossibly high standards, basically.
Yep.
The myth of logic is choosing logic over intuition and decision-making and the way you navigate your life.
Ooh, go deeper on that one because I feel like that one can be a little witchy if you don't understand.
This one is super witchy.
I love that.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I think especially when we go through puberty as girls and patriarchy, we soon learn like, oh, it's not safe to be in my body. It's not safe to inhabit my body because men are looking at me and I could be prey. And so there's this thing where we start to disconnect from our bodies and we sever the connection between our mind and bodies. And then what happens? We have trouble accessing this incredible intelligence.
Yeah.
Feelings. That's how we know whether to go in this direction or that direction. But we're disconnected from that. And layer on top of that school, which is like Western education, which is all like learn, analytical, like learn math and SATs. Verbal and SATs. Yeah. And it's not, there's all this kinesthetic intelligence and I think some kids who do like performing arts, they kind of get some of that. But if you didn't do theater, you don't.
I was a theater kid.
You're a theater kid. I could see that.
Which is probably why I'm in the business that I am in. So thank you to my parents for fostering that. But if you don't get that opportunity, you probably end up in finance.
Exactly. And well said. And I feel like so much of our intuition, comes from the body, but it also comes from the imagination, comes from our ability to have empathy for other people, put ourselves in other people's shoes, imagine the world through their eyes, and we get disconnected from that. And so this is witchy because a lot of our magic and a lot of our artistry, I think, gets buried under logic. Oof. And that's a big one for me. It's actually my second one. And it's, I think, the reason why I've had trouble maybe just writing fiction or writing poetry and really like owning myself as more of an artist is because I'm like, well, got to do this first.
Yeah. Like, I wish we could all just introduce ourselves as like fucking goddesses, like bad bitch witch goddesses. Like when someone's like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a fucking bad bitch witch artist. Like, I wish that could just be my name tag, but I want to point out
that for my multi-hyphenate.
Yes, put that in my Twitter bio. I want to touch on something you said that I thought was so fucking beautiful. And you just like said it so naturally. You were like, when we go through puberty and patriarchy, and you said patriarchy as if it's like a stage that gets added to our life. And I feel that our generation really is the generation, I'm assuming you're my age, we are the ones that are breaking down that idea of like, oh, wait, we are conditioned and we have so much unlearning to do because we really went through this, like, I imagine it like a Dr. Seuss tunnel of like, you put it in one end and it comes out the other. And we have to like put ourselves back in and come back out to our most authentic selves. And the way you said that made me go like, oh shit, like that is something specific to women. I think that we're most aware of now, I think more than ever.
Oh yeah. So we're all born into patriarchy, whether you're a man, a woman, or non-binary. You're born into this system that's been around for thousands of years, like 5,000 years roughly. Jesus. There's some debate around that, but no big deal. Yeah. Just been around for 5,000 years. Yeah. Still here,
Yikes,
hasn't gone away.
Changed.
Yeah. Some things are starting to change. But when you go through puberty, it gets like super enhanced because you're just like a girl and you're like in your body and you're having fun. You're at recess and you're like, you don't care about how you're perceived when you're like 7 or 8.
Yep.
Typically, I'm speaking generalizations, but you're like silly. You're like, you're like whatever.
Dirty
around. Exactly. And then suddenly you turn 13 and you start getting boobs and then men are looking at you. And so suddenly you go from subject to object.
Woo.
And that shift for girls is devastating.
It really is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think everyone who's listening to this right now is remembering very specific moments that like defined puberty for them that they realize now was probably so fucking toxic. And I mean, I don't know if you have any insight to like reversing that shame or reversing that like anger that stuff we went through, where I'm just kind of like, that was fucked up.
Yeah. I think just even the resurfacing memories in a safe space, and whether that's, with a therapist or with a group, and releasing a lot of anger, because I think anger, definitely, we have every right to be angry.
Yeah.
We're born into a world that says you're second place, and not only that, you're an object, and not only that, you've got to be like this. And I bring this up in the book. The book is written for women, but men and boys also suffer from patriarchy.
Right.
Because if you're a sensitive boy child,
forget about it.
Yeah.
I was literally having this I have this conversation all the time with men about being like, if you weren't raised to think that sucking another dick was homophobic, you would probably try to suck a dick just to like see what it's like. Like if you were actually allowed to explore, like I think there would be so many more like bisexual men if we were taking the pressure off of dudes too. And they're still so defensive. They're still so like, I just don't think so. I'm not attracted to dick. I'm like, how do you know though? If you were raised like patriarchy is so much more obvious to women, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Then you have like the male rights activists and shit like that. Like, oh golly. But yeah.
All right. Let me tell you about the last two good girl myths.
Yes.
Because they're biggies. The myth of harmony, huge. So this is when we seek harmony instead of allowing for conflict and confrontation, which is actually needed for change and needed for our relationships to mature. So when you're under the myth of harmony, I like to say we're under the spell of these myths. When you're under the spell of the myth of harmony, the last thing you want to do is have a difficult conversation.
Yep.
Because you're so afraid of disappointing that other person. And in the short term, that's great. You feel comfortable. You got ease. You got social harmony. But in the long term, really catches up to you.
Sheesh. That was probably my number one. I'm not going to lie.
That's so interesting because you're a comedian. And like I feel like comedians have to
be a bit confrontational, but it becomes self-deprecating. And like, even, you and I were talking before we hit record about, I'm doing all these pitch meetings for my business. And it turns into like, I've gotten notes that it's like, stop making things a joke rather than confronting like the hard question or the hard answer to something. But I even have a Post-it note that I keep on my desk all the time that says, you don't succeed or fail, you succeed and learn. Because I'm so afraid of confrontation and conflict that I see it as like failure or like a hard thing rather than being like, no, it's an opportunity for you and I to go through something together to come out the other end positively. And
to up level the relationship.
I love that.
Yeah, so this is a biggie, and you're not alone. I
Thank God.
think so many of us, yeah,
I've never
you're
had
not
it
alone.
pointed
That's the
out
good
like that,
news,
though.
girl.
You know?
What did you say?
I've never had these like poignant things said so plainly and obviously. Like this is really the first time I've heard them. Obviously, I've been listening to a bunch of your stuff, but like it just feels nice to have someone give it to you so factually and be like, no, this is a fucking thing that you are not alone. This is the truth of how we feel.
Exactly. Well, that was my hope was here's a map, here's a framework, here's some language around what's happening to you.
Language, yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't have language, okay, so first you need language around something so that you can identify it and see it happen. And then when you identify it, you can create space between you and that thing. And so language is so important. So I love it when I have a reader or someone DM me and say, I was speaking to my girlfriend and she has the myth of harmony. Like there's language around that, you know? And this is how we talked about it. And I was like, wow, that's great, you know?
Created like vocabulary.
Totally.
So what was after harmony? Because I went deep in that one.
So the myth of sacrifice is...
Yep.
Yeah, this is very old programming that we've gotten from like ancient times, basically, inherited, which is a selfless woman is a virtuous woman. So please lay yourself down on the rocks and
die.
and die
by the birds to feed your starving children.
Exactly. So this is when we put other people's needs above our own at the expense of our well-being. And with all the good girl myths, especially sacrifice, I like to say there's a moment to sacrifice. Like if you're a new mom, you're like, hey, I'm in a phase of high sacrifice. That is normal. So don't beat yourself up about it. So there are moments for these good girl myths
to make sense.
They make sense. You're entering a certain life phase, or maybe you're choosing it. Like you're choosing to sacrifice them. But what I'm bringing up with all these good girl myths is, are we choosing this or are we defaulting into it again and again? Because you could default into it for your whole life. And there are some women who do. And then they wake up at age 60, and their kids are out of the house and they're like, oh my God, who am I? What do I want?
What am I outside of that?
What am I outside of my role as mother and wife?
Yeah.
And they have like almost a second life.
Yeah.
You know, and some of us can do that. We can do that sooner. We can have that line of questioning sooner, which is empowering, I think.
How do you see it changing? Because I imagine like if we would have had this language vocabulary book like 20 years ago, I'm like, oh my God, I would have been taught. Yeah, I was raised by a pretty liberal, badass fucking woman who like told me, you always have your own bank account. You never rely on anybody. You know, I feel very lucky in that I had a mother who broke all the good girl myths. Like she did nothing traditionally. I don't think a lot of people I know are as lucky. And so I wonder, like, how do you see things changing for the better, that we are becoming more, I hate to say like woke to the problem, but like more aware to this, right? Like I'm seeing things on TikTok and social media where I'm like, oh yeah, that is a fucking patriarchal thought that is like deeply ingrained in me or like generational in my family. Like, how do you see it changing?
Well, our generation, just in the last few years, we've gone through the Me Too movement. We saw the Brett Kavanaugh thing happen.
Yeah.
We saw Trump happen.
Yeah.
And we saw George Floyd happen just within the span of 5 years. So we're like, we're waking up to the system is inside of us. It's not just outside of us. Wow. It's very much inside of us, well-meaning, you know, people who are walking around. Yeah. And even if you're liberal and progressive, you have work to do. And so I think that it is changing. Like, if you even spend like 5 minutes on TikTok looking at Gen Z, I think they're breaking their good girl myths. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm seeing so much more just like fluidity too. And it's giving me power to experiment, and like I'm gaining it from like younger kids.
Yeah.
Which like, you have to teeter like not trying to be a kid yourself still.
Yeah. There was one TikTok account that I was following, this girl. I think she must have been like I don't know, like 18 or something. Literally a model. Like she's gorgeous. And in my time, if you were 18 and you looked like her, all you cared about was looking beautiful.
Yep.
Like that was like your number one
Yep.
goal. It was like being good and looking beautiful and like, and she was literally rolling around on the ground, like doing weird impersonations, like talking about her armpit hair. Like she was not, you know, she was just being so gross. And, and I was thinking, wow, that's fascinating because
Seriously.
here's someone who would have traditionally been like trapped by her beauty, but is like so much more multidimensional. And I think we're seeing that, you know, in a lot of different ways with kids now.
I see it like they care more about connection. Like if I had to describe it, it's like they don't give a fuck. Like they're not just fighting it. They're like flipping it off. They're like, this is like, I think it was Amy Schumer that had a really good bit about like the generation, our generation speaking to women above us being like, oh my God, you had to wear skirts in the office. That's so fucked up. And like, they're like, wow, yeah, that was fucked up. But then now the kids below us are like, yeah, you let men like sexually abuse and harass you. That's fucked up. And it's like, oh yeah, that is fucked up. Like even when we think we're healing, there is still stuff that we're not aware of that we have to, like you said, kind of take pause and observe that we still have a lot of work to do, even if you are liberal, woke, you know, feminist, all that jazz.
Yes.
My question is like, how does this affect minorities differently, the patriarchy, and like what can allies do? A majority of our viewership are white women. And so I'd love to know like what we can do as allies to help break the good girl myth everywhere.
Yeah. So minorities is a huge category, and it depends on which segment you're talking about. So for me as like a Latinx immigrant, I definitely really grappled with a lot of these things, particularly around tradition and family and rules. And, you know, as an immigrant, you have an achievement bent and there's the minority myth.
Right.
So you feel like you have to like, so sometimes for women who are of minority status or women of color, not in all cases, but in some cases, good girl conditioning could be even stronger because they feel like they have to like represent for their entire group. Right. And they feel like they can't fuck up, you know? And then there's some women of color who are like, fuck you all. Like patriarchy never helped me from like white patriarchy never helped me from the beginning. And so they're really not interested in they were never a good girl. And that even that discourse is like, doesn't resonate.
Sure.
I think it actually really resonates with white, mostly white women who maybe were expected to be like the model Barbie, you know,
Hollister model.
Yeah, or like suburban mom, like, you know, kind of, they were groomed by the white patriarchy to be like, to suck up to white men. And then
look, fucking Trump happened. That's why.
Exactly. And look what happened. Yeah. And it's not just conservative white women, it's also liberal white women too.
Big time.
And so I think that we're all having a conversation around this, and it's very nuanced. So I don't like to make like huge generalizations, but I do think that, you know, if you are a white woman and you're listening to this, like look at how your good girl conditioning exists within yourself. And I think that's the primary work that you can do, and think about how it not only intersects with patriarchy, but also white supremacy. My book doesn't go into that specifically, but I think
that's your next book, right?
No,
that's its whole own thing.
It's its own thing, and I don't know that I'm the most qualified person.
Right.
Write
You're
about
so
that.
Right. I should be fucking writing about that shit coming from the South.
There you go. You're from the South. That's like a whole other layer.
I was raised in Florida and then tried to go to college in Alabama, and I quickly left. I fucking ran from that shit. I was like, bye. But then now I have that guilt of like, I didn't do the work while I was there. So now I find myself making up for it and making fun of it rather than going like, oh wait, I have a fucking chance and a voice to step into this space and like do something about it. And that's, you know, whatever, just shit I deal with on my own time. But yes,
I think that's huge though. That's great self-awareness. And I think that my friends who grew up in the South, like I have a friend who's from Texas who's now like an artist and lives in San Francisco, but she's like, oh my God, I was like a debutante. And
Yep.
and my family, like a lot of my family members own guns, and some of them are Trump supporters. And like, she's like grappling with all of that. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah. So for her, she's been breaking her myth of harmony in that she's been like setting boundaries with some family members and having hard conversations with them. Even if they don't want to have hard conversations with them.
Gotta put
like if one of her family members says something that's blatantly racist,
We're leaving, sis. Definitely being from Florida.
We're leaving, or we're having the difficult conversation with you to explain.
Exactly. Knowing when to walk away is a big part of that too, I think, of like, it like at some point I recognized that I had to cut off and remove, not from any of my immediate family members, but I have 52 cousins from one side of my family, so we have a very large family, so you have to imagine like a percentage of that is
and they all probably follow you on Instagram, right?
They know what I'm about. They know how to poke my fucking bear and poke my bear. They know what to say to like get the woke liberal angry and shit when you're around Thanksgiving, and I'm just like, oh, okay, I also know when the fucking to walk away from you and like cut you out of my life, and you no longer benefit from who I am as a person and my energy, versus I think you're worth sitting down and having a conversation with. But
totally. And I think that's a great question to ask yourself when you are in the myth of harmony and you have a toxic relationship, or someone brings up something that you think is problematic. Ask yourself, like, how much do I want to invest in this relationship? Yes. If I really want to invest in this relationship, if it matters to me, if I value it, if I love this person, then I'm going to have to pull up my big girl socks and have the hard 100%. Conversation.
100%. And I feel like I'm very curious to see how like the holiday season goes this year. I haven't really put much thought into it, but like what a different year this holiday season is going to be for so many people. I'm going to have to like do an episode about that later, because last year, or either last year or 2019, we did an episode about like how to go home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, like how to talk to your family members about this shit. But I did want to ask kind of like a caveat of this question, is how to talk to people in your life that you love and love you back about these 5 myths. Because I think I immediately go to like, oh, I'm breaking the patriarchy, I'm breaking the glass ceiling. Like it's often a conversation where I'm like, you don't know what we've been through, but how can I approach people in my life that I love about these issues and topics? Like, I'm immediately thinking of my partner, right? He's a cishet male from Boston who like somehow now I've, watched him bloom into this beautiful liberal ally that I was like, didn't think was possible. But there are still some pieces of this where I'm like, rather than telling me, hey, don't talk about yourself that way, maybe look into like why my thought process goes into talking to myself about like, oh, I hate my body today or this outfit. And he's kind of like, he gets really sad. He's like, I just feel so sad that like women have had to think about themselves that way. Like, why couldn't you guys been lifted up? And I'm like, yeah, I don't fucking know, Jared. Why don't we like dissect this together? So do you have any advice on like how to talk to people who like want to talk about it?
Also, you don't have to protect him from his sadness. I hope you know that. Because oftentimes then we're like, oh, I don't want you to feel sad, so I won't bring up this hard thing that I'm going through.
No, I'm like, fuck that shit. Feel it. Feel the burn, baby.
Exactly. Feel the burn. So with my husband, for example, giving really tangible examples helped him wake up to what we call his male privilege. Mm-hmm. So for example, this was like a few years ago, I had parked in a public garage, and it was late at night, and I was going to get my car. Now, every woman here listening knows that feeling of going into a garage at night. Like, what are you feeling?
Mm-hmm. Just fear and anxiety, heightened, need a weapon.
Yeah, you're hyper vigilant. You're like, I'm going to use this key as like a knife if I need to.
Switchblade ring.
Yeah, you're like holding on for your dear life. You just want to get in your car and like lock the door as fast as possible.
Check behind you, underneath. Yeah, all that shit.
Yeah, an experience that a lot of men have never had. Is that incredible?
Wild to me.
Yeah.
Why? I asked my boyfriend this, not to like completely derail, but we were jogging, and he jogs faster than me. And so, we're a little bit away from each other. And like during a break, I was like, did you see how many men looked at me? And he was like, oh, no, I wasn't even thinking about it. And I was like, isn't that weird that we both just took the same hour-long jog, and the entire time I'm thinking like, fuck you, dude, stop looking at me. No, I don't want to fucking talk to you. Ew. Like, and he never even thought about it. And I just like was like, isn't that funny that he doesn't have to worry about that?
Yeah.
That's wild.
So it's wild. It's just totally different experience. But also the other day I was thinking like, there's half the population pees standing up.
Yeah.
Can you imagine going to the bathroom and every time you urinate, you're standing in a power pose?
Wow. Good for them.
No, but like since you're little,
you literally have to sit like hands folded, dainty,
yeah.
You're not
we
like
have a totally different
on this
experience of
fucking
peeing.
thing. Yeah.
We have a totally different experience of peeing. And it's like such a daily thing. Like, how do you think that affects? It was just so fascinating. Like, how does that affect?
Like that.
Yeah. How does that affect someone's psyche? Like how they go out in the day, like knowing that they peed standing up.
I think we should all try peeing standing up is what I think.
Or men should try squatting once in a while.
I do know a couple guys, and I will say they are more in touch with their divine feminine who pee sitting down. And I think that might have something to do with it. But you're right. It's little shit like that is years of fucking oppression and patriarchy that just melts our mind. And now we're waking up to it. And, some people do want to wake up to it, and some of them want to just like keep living the fucking life we live. But, it seems like we're heading in the direction of breaking that and identifying it. So could you maybe talk a little bit about, like, I'm sure some of the listeners heard the 5 myths and were kind of like, oh shit, that sounds like me. Like, do you have tips on being self-aware? Because often that could be the hardest process, is stopping and being mindful of that and going like, oh shit, this is a moment where I'm doing this thing. Because it's really hard to be mindful and work on yourself.
It is. So what I recommend is, if you can, do the assessment I have in chapter 3.
Ooh,
where it outlines.
Quiz.
It outlines which of the myths are the strongest right now, and which are, you're okay, you got this.
Yeah.
We typically have all 5, but there are 1 or 2 that are dominant, and then there are some that come up in certain contexts. So I have some journaling prompts and questions around that. So I think that's huge, like learning each myth in depth, understanding what it sounds like, what it looks like. Every single one has a main strategy for approval, and then it has a power you get to reclaim when you break that myth. So when you understand each myth, really in depth, and then you take the assessment, you're going to be like, okay, I think I have a handle on what's happening to me a little bit more. And I really do think awareness is half the battle, if not more.
Yeah. And
then, depending on which myth, there are different sets of tools and techniques, because each one works on us very differently. So I'm happy to go into certain frameworks or tools for specific ones, if that's helpful.
I thought it was really interesting when you said that there's a power you can reclaim from it. And I'm curious about that. Like, I don't want to give anything away. Obviously, I want everyone to go read the book and like see what it is. But like, what can we look forward to when we become, survivors of this process?
Exactly. Like, who are we on the other side of this? And who are you when you're not trying to be good? Probably a bad bitch.
But the listeners know my friend Lord DIY. We were talking about like the boss babe being canceled and like girl boss thing. And I was like, shit, I feel bad that I ever identified that, because when I was in it, I wasn't aware of like what it was doing to oppress others, and like the privilege I stood even within that, thinking like, I just spent all this time trying to reclaim my power. Why am I like throwing away girl boss? But I was like, what are we now? And she's like, we're bad bitches. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna hold on to bad bitch for a little while then.
Yeah, hold on to it until we then say, no, you can't.
Yeah, you can't be a bad bitch. You got to be something else. But like, it feels
pretty good right now.
Like you said, like it has to change, right? Like we have to grow.
And I think it's okay to evolve and say, hey, that thing that I said 2 years ago or 3 years ago, like I've grown as a person and I've educated myself, and that doesn't work anymore. That was me then. I'm a new person now. I think we need more, especially now in the environment of cancel culture. I think we need more. We need to give people more leeway for 100%. Self-examination and growth.
I mean, I could do a whole episode on that, but like, I'm a dumb white bitch comedian from the South who's definitely done and said dumb shit, jokes on Twitter or like old sketches or whatever it is, where it was like, that was, it was still bad back then, but it was like funny bad back then. Or now it's, it's that awareness too of like, not trying to run from that person. I have a lot of empathy for that girl. Like I, was a drinker still back then. I've been sober 2 years now. Like I feel a lot of like, aw, like I kind of want to just hug that girl. Like you didn't know, you weren't raised in an arena to care about like cultural sensitivity or like have the breadth of friends diversity you have now. Like you have that chance now. And like, how beautiful is that? And if you spend all the time like hating your past self of who you used to be, there's no way you can grow and be an ally now. Like there's no way. And that self-shame thing, I think, is big for a lot of people or like, these listeners is like letting go of that self-shame as it applies to cancel culture and to, the good girl myth.
Absolutely. I just heard Trevor Noah, he talked about this because some comedians, are apologizing for something they said, 4 or 5 years ago. And he was like, well, did the audience laugh? It's like, yeah, the audience laughed. So the comedian is a product of the time, right? And the audience was there with him or her. Right. And so, the comedian is reflective of where the consciousness was at that time. Mm-hmm. And so it's also not all on the artist, I think.
100%.
And it's
he's
a little
so smart.
I know. He's a real smarty. That wasn't my idea. That was Trevor
No,
Noah's
I really like him. Rarely does he say shit where I'm like, no, I don't agree with you. I haven't read his book though. I also is your book on audiobook?
It is. It is on audio.
I'm scrolling ahead to that confrontation chapter immediately, the harmony.
Yeah, go to the Myth of Harmony and read it. So I do. The only thing which was weird with the audiobook was the assessment.
Oh yeah.
There's no way anyone can retain that in their head.
Right.
When they're driving, I'm like, option A, blah, blah, blah. Option B.
Is that what you had to do?
Yeah. I had to go through, I had to read out the whole quiz. And I was like, no, the person needs paper and needs to see the quiz.
Oh my God. So that's why everyone keeps asking about my book being audio, and my whole book is a workbook. So I'm like, read the pages.
Like buy the workbook, like so you could do the work. Yeah, like sit down and do the work.
Describe like a connect the dots page that comes out to be like butterflies. I don't fucking know how I'm going to do that.
It's like, and now journal.
Yeah. And I'll wait 1 hour until you're done journaling. That's so funny. Majo, I wish we could like keep talking forever because I feel like we've only just touched the tip of the iceberg of our myths and breaking, and you seem like right up our alley of voice that I want my listeners to be like connected to. So can you please tell us where we can get more of you? Give us all the places.
Sure. So I'm available on Instagram at Majo Molfino. Majo spelled with a J, so that's MAJO. And that's also my website, my name, majomolfino.com. And there you can find, I have a free quiz, I have like free trainings, like anything you want to dive into. I have my podcast, which you mentioned at the beginning, the Heroine Podcast. And like you said, I do a lot of things. So there's the book, there's the podcast, the website. Yeah.
Take your pick. How you like to consume content.
Take your pick. But for the book, the easy URL to remember for the book, because my name's a little complex, is goodgirlmyth.com.
There you go. Put that
doesn't get easier than that, folks.
I love it. And seriously, guys, I'm going directly to the website to listen because it's reinforcing and validating. Like I said, having you say these things out so clearly, I was like, God damn, I wish I would have heard this way younger or like was taught this in some sort of feminism class in public school. But then I have to think about like feminism being taught in a Florida public school. And I'm just like, oh, Jesus Christ, we still have so many light years to go.
I know. It's like we feel like we've made so much progress and yet
And yet.
And
That'd be
yet.
the name of a podcast in it.
Yeah.
Well, will you please come back? Because I feel like we still have so much more to talk about.
Totally.
I feel
love
like
this.
Yeah, absolutely. Confidants, please find all of the links below. Please go check out her podcast, the book. And as you know, you can always find us at confidentlyinsecurepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on all the socials at confidentlypod. Don't forget to go get the book. The Sensitive merch is out now. Speaking of being sensitive, go rate this 5 stars. And if you don't rate it 5 stars, please don't rate it anything because I'm sensitive. And we will see you next week. Thank you.